to the National Critics' Choice Online News. I'm Robin Steinberg, and welcome to the Steinberg Review. Today, we'd like to celebrate the new year with our great guest, none other than Dr. Kirpal Singh. He's a poet and also a human rights advocate here in Southeast Asia. And he's going to tell us more about his books that he's written on poetry especially, and also life here in Southeast Asia. Dr. Kirpal, welcome to my show.
Thank you.
And really, everybody likes to find out, how your life has been as a poet and also as a human rights advocate. Because a lot of folks out here are just wondering how much rights are that is available here in Southeast Asia, especially Singapore. And also, in terms of poetry, you've been writing poetry for all your life. And tell us, can someone actually succeed in life with the life of being a poet?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that. It depends on what you mean by succeed in life as a poet. I suppose if your expectations are not too huge, you don't want too many Ferraris and, just sitting in first-class cabins, then I think you can actually succeed. However, the success rate of poets in, say, Southeast Asia vary from country to country. I think there is probably a better chance of a poet being sort of successful in countries like Philippines and maybe even Malaysia more than Singapore. I think Singaporeans, we tend to be a little bit skeptical of poetry. And we are not yet, I suppose, old in one way of putting it. We're not sufficiently historicized. We don't have the length and scope of history to convince our people that poetry and poets are very important, they're very relevant, and they actually enlarge the platform for discourse of any sort. And interesting, you should talk about human rights. Poets in places like Malaysia and Thailand, for example, Indonesia, they're taken very seriously. In Indonesia, my friend, the poet Sulak, he goes in and out of jail. Every time he writes a poem where he hints that the whole issue of royalty in Thailand is a very complicated problem, somebody, sort of dobs him in. And so he goes in and it's a choice whether he becomes 6 months as a monk, go around with a begging bowl, or he serves in prison, right? He's done both. You know what I mean? The king, on the other hand, I'm told, privately laughs and is quite amused at these shenanigans that go on. And he, in fact, is very impressed by Sulak's poetry because the poetry is very good. But of course, his advisors, the king's advisors, tell him that this poet tends to be a little bit provocative. Now, in Singapore, the same thing happens. My own poems over the many decades that I've been writing, you're right, I've been writing since the age of 8. Many a time, I've been both officially and unofficially, spoken to, about the kind of things that I write. And this is where I will talk about the human rights thing a little bit more. As you know, Robin, the world is a very huge and strange place. You know what I mean? I like to think it's familiar. I like to think that even my own country, Singapore, is familiar, but every day I'm surprised by what I see around me, either in terms of the behavior of the people, either in terms of the events that are going on around me, which I probably had not paid too much attention to before, or in terms of aspirations. And this last thing is very important. I think the whole issue of human rights is very intimately tied up with aspirations. What do you aspire to be? What do you want your country to aspire to become? And in that way, stages of development are very different, right? The aspirations of, say, the average Indonesian is very different from the aspirations of the average Singaporean. So there's no more level playing field. And this is very interesting because we think that with development, things become more even. But actually they don't. They become more uneven. And the bumps are very, very real. So while, for example, the average Cambodian, the average Laotian, is still trying to eke out enough just to, eat twice a day, I think most Singaporeans are pretty complacent and feel that they have enough to eat 5 times a day. So those kinds of worries are not their worries anymore. And the worry of the average Singaporean tends to be more and more now, what kind of a house can I live in, How am I going to downgrade from 5 rooms to 4 rooms, or am I going to upgrade? Am I going to change my car from a very simple, little Toyota thing to a bigger, more Lexus type model, or from a Lexus type model to a more, European Ferrari or something? So I think the whole idea of human rights has become very complicated these days. You see, there was a time when human rights was basically the capacity to say what you feel and not be harassed for it and not be victimized for it. But these days, in a complex world, it's very difficult even to have that basic minimal freedom, because whatever I say, I need to temper because of the complexity of the environment in which I find myself. Now, once you go beyond the superficial, everything that we say, in a way is traceable to the way we think or the way we've been brought up to think. And the influences there are obviously home, probably family, very important, education, and together with home and education, things like one's ethnicity, religious orientation, those kinds of things. And yet, these are precisely the areas which are taboo. You know what I mean? Which you can't speak about too openly, because even though legally one may have the right to say such and such, in terms of being sensitive to those we mix with, those we work with, those we talk with, engage with, relate to, I think our tongues are pretty tight, So my interest in human rights, apart from trying to enlarge, widen and expand the scope of hopefully my fellow citizens, and not just citizens of Singapore but citizens of the world, is to try and advocate, and this is what I've been doing all the time, towards a more humane and a more human way of conducting ourselves. And this doesn't mean that freedom in all its many different ways is therefore the number one focus of my advocacy. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes freedom is in fact not a very good thing. The freedom to kill, the freedom to murder, the freedom to bully, the freedom to even just whistleblow without being careful, the freedom to say whatever I want on my blog and all of that. I think that's more bravado. And bravado is quite cheap. You know what I mean? Real action is very, very difficult. You see, for example, if you take the recent case of the girl who died in Singapore but was a victim of the rape in Delhi, right? If you really think about it, we got to ask ourselves, so where do we go from here? Right? So people say the laws of India must be changed, this, that and the other. But somebody says, when you think about it, this particular incident has garnered so much, almost worldwide attention because of the timing and because of the gruesomeness and the horror of it. It's a bit like the Connecticut killings, you know what I mean? Before the 26-year-olds were killed and massacred in this way, the people broadly were not too, I can't say they were not too disturbed. They were disturbed ever since the Columbine school massacre and all of that. But it took the death of 26-year-olds to bring the American conscience to a head. And now, even the NRA is under a lot more pressure than before to talk about the bearing of arms, right? So, of course, you have the constitutional right to bear arms, but everybody is saying, hey guys, look, we got to think about this. We're thinking about, Obama is saying we've got to do something about the assault weapons that are used for not just defending but actually murdering other people, and we've got to think about this in a very serious way. So, I think human rights everywhere in the world are very, very complicated today.